Alright, we're gonna get started. So, to start off, when you want to start working on your first project for this lecture, we would like you to make your own GitHub account and go to github.com/Wentworth Game Development. The link will be in the description of this video. And find our Lesson 1 level design project and fork it so that you can track your updates through GitHub. But if you don't want to use version control for your first project, you can also just launch Unreal Engine and use the 3D side scroller template that we're about to start using. So I'm just going to quickly cover the basics of using GitHub for version control inside of Unreal Engine 4. So to start off, we have our GitHub organization right here. So in order to start this lecture, you're going to want to go to our first lesson, level design, and you're going to want to fork the repository, which essentially makes a copy of it on your own profile that you can do whatever you want with. I've already forked this, so I can go over to my repositories. And I can find it right here, lesson 1, forked from WitGameDev. So now that it's here, I want to clone it. So I can do it one of two ways. I can either take this, download the zip, or I can use SSH or HTTPS in order to clone it with what's called Git. So I have this application called GitHub Desktop that I can use to clone this repository on my end. So I'm going to go to repository and I'm going to clone a repository. So I'm going to go to file and I'm going to clone this repository, and it's going to look and say my repository is up here, and then if I'm in organizations right down here. But for our cases, we forked it, so it's going to be in our repositories here. So if I go to lesson 1 level design, I can click this right here. I can press clone, and that's going to download all the stuff that's on GitHub onto my local machine and put it in a folder for me. So now that it's finished cloning, it's telling me that this repository uses Git LFS, which stands for large file storage. In general, you probably won't need this for this project, but it is initialized with Git LFS because dealing with larger projects, it's usually easier using that. So you can just press initialize, and that'll just initialize LFS on your end. And if you don't have it installed, I'm almost certain it fetches it for you, but it's not really that important for this project, like I'm saying. So now that I have my repository here, I'm going to want to go to it, right click on it, and I'm going to press Show in Explorer. So this brings up this window with my lesson 1 level design. So it has all its different files in here, and I'm going to want to double click on the Unreal Engine 4 project file, and that's going to open up the version of Unreal Engine that this project was made in. So in this case, it's 4.20.3. All right. So once you get into Unreal for the first time, it's kind of intimidating at first because you have all these different windows and you don't know what anything does. So to start off, I'm going to do a brief overview of what all these windows are and when you would use them. So possibly the most used area in Unreal Engine is the content browser because it lets you view all of your different 3D models, materials, animations, and pretty much everything you need to edit to create a working game. In the middle, we have what's called the viewport. This is a uh, this is just your game level, and essentially you can place objects in here, and they will encompass the world inside of your game. So I'm gonna go through some of the easy shortcuts to remember for when you're moving objects around in the level. So when I click on an object right here, like see Ledge 3 on the right, uh, I'm presented with 3 arrows that are blue, green, and red. So red will move it in the x-axis, which in this level is depth. Green will move it in the y-axis, which in this level is left and right, because it's a 3D side scroller, so our character is only going to be moving left and right on the y-axis. And then the z-axis is height, so moving up and down. So the only 2 axes that we're really going to have to worry about when we're doing level design for this game are the y-axis and the z-axis, because our character will not be allowed to move in the x-axis because it's a side scroller. He's only going to be moving side to side and up and down. So looking at this level, it's a little bit small, and I think the first thing I would want to do would be to make it a little bit wider and maybe add some height to it. So to start off, I'm going to get the main level floor, and I'm going to press R to scale it, and I'm going to bring this out widthwise just a little bit more so I get some extra room to play around with. So the only thing that we need to do now is scale the back wall to match that. So I'm going to do the same thing and scale this out as close as I can to the width of the floor. So now that that is pretty close, I'm just going to overview using a different view in order to get the same result that I just got in this view called perspective. So if you click up here where it says perspective, you can see that you get different orthographic views that can help you when you're moving objects around to get a more precise placement of the object. So if I switch to top, it can show me the entire outline of the level. Like you can see right here, our characters right here, and these are the different objects that they jump on. And then our wall that we have selected in the back is right here, this orange object. So as you can see, even though it looked like it was close to being right where we wanted it, it's actually not. So we can press W to get back to what's called the transform tool, or the translate tool, and move this back a little bit more. And another thing you can tweak with this to make it easier is with this thing right here called snapping. So you can either have it snap to a smaller value or not snap at all. So go back here. Now that I've set snapping from 10 to 5, I can go right in here and move it back so it's as level as I can possibly get it with the back wall. So now when I go back to my perspective view, I can see that it's a little bit closer. So now I could do this with the two side walls, but honestly, for our purposes, it takes a decent amount of time to do that. So I'm just going to push them off to the side as close as I can. That looks about right. It's not perfect, but it does the job, and your character won't see the outside of these walls anyways. So now I want to move all three of these objects right here to the left so that I can expand my level widthwise. So to do that, I'm going to click on one of them, and then I'm going to hold Control and click the second one and the third one. And now I have the tools to translate all three of these objects together. So I'm going to click the Y-axis, the green arrow, and drag these over to where I think they are about good. A little bit off the wall maybe, but perfect. So now that those are here, we need to move the same part on the opposite side to the right. Okay, that looks about right. So now that we have our start and finish off to the side like that, I think I want to have the end be on the left side and the start be on the right side. So as you can see, my character's right here, and his spawn point is actually right here. So I'm going to move him over to the right more. So he starts in a place where he can see that he has to jump up here in order to start climbing. Okay, so now that I have that out of the way, I want to add some more blocks for him to jump on. So I'm going to first start by moving these middle cubes over to the right. So same premise, click the first one and then hold Control and click all the other ones. So I can move these over to a point that he can jump to. So I'm going to verify that he can actually make that jump just by pressing play, clicking on the viewport, and just controlling him like that. So I don't think he can make this jump. So I'm going to move those a little bit closer to him. Let's see if that does it. So click in the viewport and there you go. He can make that jump. Perfect. So our character can jump up and down on these cubes, but you know, it's kind of boring, so I want to add some interactivity. So I'm going to make what's called a blueprint that will allow an object to interact with my player. So to start off, I think I want to make him be able to jump between cubes, and if he falls between, I want him to not survive the fall. I want him to die. So maybe it could be like a body of lava or spikes or something like that, and you can go crazy with whatever you want the obstacle to be that he could fall onto. But for our purposes, we're just going to make a rectangle that he can jump onto. Um, so let's see. I'm going to right click here, and I'm going to make what's called a blueprint class. So once you get into here, you're going to get a different choice for how you want to parent this blueprint. And unless you're making something with more interactivity than we're doing right now, actor is generally the best choice. But there is more in parenting that I'm not going to get into in this video, but we will in future lessons. So I'm going to click actor. So now I have a new blueprint. It's asking me to name it. I'm going to call it death volume. Press enter, and I'm going to double click on it to open up the blueprint editor. So now I'm in the viewport. This white sphere in the middle doesn't actually render in the game. It's just for reference to the center of your viewport. So the first thing I want to add is a box so that the player can actually see it. So I'm going to go into the Add Components tab on the left, and I'm going to type in static mesh. So a static mesh is a mesh without a skeleton that has a physics body built in. So a physics body allows the player to collide with it and not actually just fall right through the object as if it was just a 3D model without a collision. So I'm going to click on this and I'm going to choose the mesh I want it to be. So because we started with starter content, we have cubes, floors, and different materials already built in. If you didn't do starter content, you should not see anything here. But for our use, we're going to use the 1m underscore cube, which is just a cube that we can model to however we like. So because I know from the viewport that we're on the y-axis from left to right, I can use that information to know how to scale this object correctly. So now I have the y-axis going left to right. I can scale this object to make it a little bit thinner and make it wider. And maybe a little bit more depth might be nice too. All of these things that I'm modifying can also be seen in the Details tab on the right where it says Scale. So it has location for translation, like with this tool right here, or W. Then there's rotation with E, which is up here. And then there's scale with R right here. So I think that's about good for what I want, but there's no way for my character to know when he hits this object. So I need to add another component over here called a box collision. So this collision is going to be able to tell my actor, or tell the blueprint that we're making that when our side scroller character collides with it to run an action. So it starts off being rooted in the static mesh. We don't want that because we want to be able to modify it independently of the static mesh so it's not a size that doesn't work for us. So I'm going to click on this and I'm going to drag it to default scene root and press attach. Once it's here, we can go to the transform tool and move it up. As you can see, it wasn't really the exact size we wanted, so we can press R to scale it left to right, make it about the same width as the object, hopefully not overlapping on the sides, and then make it a little bit wider, or depth-wise. While movement on the x-axis doesn't really matter in this game, I still want to make sure that the character actually collides with it, so I have to make sure it's close to the width of this object. Alright, now that we have our box collision and our static mesh added in, we want to add some interactivity to this. So the way we do that is we click on our box collision on the left in the Components tab, and then we go over to the Details tab on the right, scroll to the bottom, and where it says On Component Begin Overlap, we press this plus. So this is going to add a node to our event graph, which is essentially where we do all of our blueprint scripting. That's going to say, when something collides with this box, I want to run this exec right here. So I can link anything to this. Just for reference, I can make this print something when I want to know if it's touching it. So I'm going to have this just print hello when our actor touches it, just for reference. So now that I've compiled and saved this, it's down at the bottom, and I can just drag it into our game. So now that it's right here, I can have my character go and see what happens if he walks into it. And if you look at the top left of the screen, it says hello because it can tell that our character collided with it. But it'll only run once because he's still touching it. If you jump and then touch it again, it'll run again. Okay, so we want our character to die when he touches this print string, or when he touches this box collision. So we're going to need to do what's called a cast. A cast is essentially saying that I want to go to the 3D side scroller character right here, or the side scroller character, and do something with the features that are built into his blueprint. So in our case, we want to destroy the actor, but we can't run that from here. We have to cast to him and then destroy him. So the way you do that is you find other actor, which is the actor that is colliding with the box collision, and you do cast to side scroller character. So this returns a true or a false value, or a boolean, whereas cast passes or cast fails. So we don't want to kill an actor, or we don't want to kill the side scroller character if he's not colliding with the box. If some other object is colliding with the box, then we don't want to do anything. So we're not going to bother with cast failed. The only thing we're going to touch is the exec here. So to do that, we're going to say, as the side scroller character, I want to destroy actor. So when you drag out from there, it defaults to when the cast passes. So now that that's there, I'm going to press compile and save. I'm going to go back here. And as you can see, when I jump on this, I'm dead. That's the end of it. So I'm going to do a little bit of work to make sure that this is obvious, that this is like a spot that you don't want to go to. So I'm going to add what's called a material. Materials can be a little intimidating at first, but they're really simple when you get down to it. So I'm going to add a red material, or maybe I'll call it danger. So if I double click on this, I can see I have a bunch of different nodes that I have to give values. So I'm not going to go super in depth on materials today, but I am going to make what's called a vector parameter. All it really does is tell you that you can have 4 values for your red, green, blue, and alpha. So to do this, I'm going to double click on it, and I'm going to set saturation to the top, and I'm going to set the value to the top. So now this is returning a red value. Now that this is returning red, I'm going to drag the white node to the top, which is going to return all 4 of these parameters here, over to base color. So now we have a red material. You could use what's called constants with these other parameters here for metallic, specular, and that would mess with the shininess or the roughness or etc. of all of these values. However, it's not really necessary for our use, so I'm going to leave it the way it is. So I'm going to save this. And now once it's saved, I can just X out of this. I'm going to go into depth volume, and I'm going to go back to my viewport, and I want to change the material of this cube at the bottom. So see where it says materials on the right for element 0. I'm going to right click on this, and I'm going to change it to danger. And I'm going to press compile and save. Now in the level, it's red, so it's more obvious to the user that he doesn't want to go on this. So now I'm just going to drag this underneath the cubes that I'm going to have him jump in between. Scale it a little bit wider and move it back to the left. Okay. Now we want to make the user have to make some jumps to get over this. So I'm going to press Control C or Command C if you're on a Mac, and then Control V or Command V if you're on a Mac. And then space these out a little bit so the user has to jump between them. So yeah, that works. Make this a little bit thinner. Scale it to the left a little bit more. For what we're doing, this is just going to be a test room experience, so we don't have to go crazy with the detail. However, we do want this to be centered on the x-axis, so that there isn't a chance the user falls behind it or in front of it. So now that that's there, I'm going to go and start playing the game and see what happens. See if the user can make these jumps. when you're doing level design, it's always a good idea to periodically test your game and make sure that the jumps you're making are actually, easy enough for the user to make. So now these are pretty easy. I could probably make the space a little bit wider. So I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna make this one go off a little bit here. This goes here and then there. And I have to space this out a little bit more so that it's in the middle. Sometimes it's good to hold right click and use your arrow keys to move around so that you can kind of get a good idea of where your object is in 3D space, because it's kind of hard to see when you're looking at it just from the front or just from the top. So that should be a little bit more difficult for our player. So now that that's there, see if you can make this still. Yeah, perfect. Okay. So now I kind of want to make some more objects so that he can land up top over here. So let's control click on both of these and move this upwards. Move this up to the top. So we're going to make our character have to get up there somehow. All right, so that works. All right, so they already have programmed these little cubes here for us in this shape. So I think I'm going to control click both of these, copy them and paste them and add them in over here. Maybe rotate them a little bit, make it a little more vertical. Yeah, that looks good. Okay, I'm gonna copy and paste one more, put it right there. That looks pretty good. Okay, cool. So now our character can get from end to end if he can make the jump. Perfect. So one other thing that we might want to do is make it obvious for the player when he gets to the end that he's reached the end of the game. So one way to do this is to add another blueprint over here that could be like a little box that he could jump onto. So in our case, we can just add a little rectangle on top of this that instead of a death volume is a endgame volume or something like that that prints a message to the user and is like, okay, well, here, you reached the end of the game, you win. So we're going to create another blueprint class from the actor parent. We're going to call it game over, or end game sounds better because it doesn't sound like we lose. So I'm going to click into here, and I'm going to want to do basically the same thing I did with the death volume and add a static mesh, and I'm going to want to add a box collision. Okay, so this time it didn't get rooted in the static mesh, which is good. So as long as both of these objects are rooted in the default scene root, then you're good. So click on static mesh, and I think we want to make this a cube again, or maybe we can make it a flag. Maybe if we put a cylinder there or a pillar there. Oh no, it's not round. So let's do this. We're gonna make like a little gate that he has to walk through. So in order to do this, we're gonna scale it, or we're gonna add another one of these static meshes. Okay, and then we're gonna translate this a little bit to the right. And a good practice to get into is like placing this into the level so you can get a good idea of the scale that you're making it. Because as you can see, this is much bigger than you would have thought looking at it from the other way. So I'm gonna rotate this 90 degrees, or negative 90 in our case, and I'm gonna translate it over to as close to center as I can. And I can notice that the center of the object and the box collision are over here, so I'm gonna want to move that so it's in the center. So I'm going to scale this down also a little bit. Well, as you can see, that's not scaling it uniformly. So I'm going to want to click on the middle and scale it down so that all the factors are scaled down together. Move this over to the right, and now that looks pretty close. Maybe I should scale it down a little bit more, but you know what? It's good enough for our case. We want the player to be able to see that you can jump through that. Okay, so I'm going to go back into this blueprint, into the viewport at the top, and I'm going to move both of these objects more to the right so that the scene root is in the center. Okay, that looks good. And now I want to move the box collision so it's in the center of these two pillars. So I'm going to need to scale it widthwise. And now I'm going to scale it heightwise. It doesn't really matter if it takes up the whole height of the two pillars because our character will collide with it even if only his feet touch it. As long as he goes through it, he will collide with it. Okay, that looks pretty good. So I'm going to compile that and save it for now. And I'm going to check and see now that I moved the root, the object moved over a little bit too. So I can just move that over right there. And I'm going to move it backwards a little bit in the green y-axis. Perfect. Okay, so actually maybe a little bit this way, because if our player jumps up, we don't know what's going to happen. So I'm going to put this up here. So the player has to get up here to win. Okay, perfect. So now go back into this. We're going to do about the same thing we did before, where we go to the static mesh, or the box collision, go down to the bottom, go on component begin overlap, and now this is in our event port or event graph. So we're going to do another cast to side scroller character. And when that passes, we want to tell him that he won. So we're just going to print string. We're going to print game over, you win. Okay, so I'm going to compile and save this. We're going to see if that works. Game over, you win. So judging by the scale of my character, I should probably make this a little bit higher. So in order to do that, I don't have to actually go into the viewport. I can literally just press R, scale it upwards, and that'll scale it so it's a little bit higher, maybe a little bit too much. So scale that back down right there. Perfect. And you can tweak with these things all you want to make it look perfect, but for our test room environment, it doesn't need to be amazing. So in our next lesson, we're going to cover more complex blueprint mechanics. On the table to make for next week are double jumping jump boxes that'll throw you into the air if you jump onto them. Maybe some moving cubes would be cool. And we're just going to go into the mechanics of how blueprints work, what makes them do what they do, and how you can make your own based on what you want to do in your game.